Hello and welcome to Why the Beatles Matter. This is Sean Gaylord, and I am very grateful to be here with Jonathan Pretus. Jonathan, if you are following him, you know that he is the founder, the co-host, the co-creator of one of my favorite podcasts, Ranking the Beatles. He is not only a Beatles aficionado, he is an aficionado of all things music. And he and I have several musical paths that we kind of hover around, from the Monkees to the Beach Boys and Brian Wilson and Mike Nesmith. He also performs in the Walrus, which is a New Orleans based, and Jonathan is New Orleans based, Beatles experience. It is a Beatles cover band that does both straight up covers and different arrangements of Beatle classics. And I am very pumped to have Jonathan here on the podcast. Jonathan, welcome, man.
Thanks, Sean. How you doing, man? I appreciate the very kind intro.
Well, hey, I appreciate the kindness of your time, and you and I at some point, I think we were separated at birth because we do swim in the same musical marrow, and it's in it. And just in our pre-conversation, we made some mentions of the Beatles, but then we went down a Portlandia,
Went down the road.
Smith, Brian Wilson, kind of smorgasbord. So
Yeah.
I appreciate the connections, because it's as you know, very few people will get the reference of supernatural, perhaps baloney.
Baloney, perhaps not. It's good to find your tribe. I'm always glad that, one of the things I'm really glad about having started this podcast at this point in life is like it's a world in which you can find people that are so on the same page with the stuff you like and the things that you're into, and kind of just the way you want to be and the things you want to put out into the world. So it's great to like meet somebody like with you, who like we're obviously cut from the same cloth, and that's amazing.
Yeah, man.
And we've never met in person, so like
No, yeah, no,
one
we
day.
haven't. One day we will, and we'll jam out and do our own carnival of light.
Yeah.
Um, Speaking of the podcast, and it's one thing that I'm sure with ranking Beatles songs, and it's kind of like for me when people ask me, what who's my favorite Beatle, and I have different answers prepared, or what's my favorite Beatles song, or what's my favorite Beatles album, and in some cases it's easy to provide that answer.
Mhm.
In other cases, it's not. When I listen to the Sirius channel's holiday countdowns, I'm arguing with them about how, why is Here Comes the Sun number 47? It's a
Yep.
great song. When I see the promo for your podcast, I'm like, why is this song that I love so below the equator here? So
Yeah.
I'd love to know the origin story of ranking the Beatles, and kind of your MO. And it's probably not to piss off Beatle fans, but maybe it is. I don't
It's
know.
not, but it certainly does. Um, the before I tell you the story, I will make a quick comment because you mentioned the serious holiday countdown. I was in the car this last month, and the countdown was on, and I forget who was announcing it, but they're like, for the first time ever in the top 100, coming in at number 91 is "You Know My Name, Look Up the Number," and I was so excited about that because that was like that's a high ranking song for us. Like I love that song. I think
Same
I
here.
think we had it at like 102 out of 223, and people said I was nuts for it. But I was like, apparently maybe it's because we gave it its props. I don't know. I'll take the credit. It's okay. But so the origin for ranking the Beatles, it's one of those many COVID time stories. Like you mentioned, I'm a musician, so during lockdown, I wasn't playing shows for a long while and had nothing to do aside from just sitting at home. And one weekend, I was sitting here just in the house and had nothing to do, and thought to myself, I wonder if I could rank the entire catalog of the Beatles, like least favorite to most favorite, because I don't hate any of it. Like
Mhm.
they're my absolute favorite band. I love I will defend everything that they've put out. Um, but I figured, is there a way that I could rank it, least favorite to most favorite? How would that work? And so I put everything into a spreadsheet. I color coded everything by album. And to be really nerdy, I color coded it based on like dominant color schemes of the album. So like Sergeant Pepper is like red with black font. Rubber Soul is green with brown font. Like, it's really goofy.
Nice.
But it's what made sense in my brain. And so I basically spent like 2 days, 3 days sitting at my kitchen counter, just listening to everything and just kind of thinking on gut reaction of like, do I want to hear this more than this? And I knew kind of my top five. My favorite Beatles song has been my favorite Beatles song for a long time. I know a lot of people, it changes all the time for them. For me, there's one that I always have thought like, this is the peak. Like, that is my favorite. That is the thing for me. And it's stayed that way for a long time. So I put that top five kind of in place first. Then I kind of knew the three that I was like, I don't need to ever hear these again. And those were Komm gib mir dein Hand and Sie liebt dich, the German singles,
Right.
and Mr. Moonlight, which I know everyone hates on Mr. Moonlight, and I hate to like jump on the bandwagon.
Oh,
It
man.
just, come on.
I love that song. It's one of my favorites.
I love it. It's just, man, it's just so cheesy.
The organ, come on,
it's so cheesy.
And the
It starts off so promisingly. Like,
yeah.
it's this godlike vocal from John, and then this like ham-fisted organ rumba comes in, and it's just, it's charming. And when it comes on, I'm like, this is so goofy. But so I kind of gave myself that beginning and end, and then just kind of started ballparking things. And as I got kind of like a first draft, then it became, okay, now I need to kind of not round robin, but need to kind of like start pitting songs against each other to find like where things should kind of land.
Mm-hmm.
So it took me about, I want to say 3 or 4 days in total. And then I had this list and I sat there with it for a couple days and made a couple of little small changes. And then I like locked the file. I was like, all right, cool. That's my list. So at first I was just going to start posting things on Facebook, one a day, just to like communicate with the outside world, just to like have a topic of conversation that wasn't like, oh God, the world is ending. Like, this is horrible. Like, I was trying to just do something fun and positive. So I started posting one a day, and it was getting great comments. Like, my whole day would be responding to this Facebook thread. And after about 2 weeks, I'd done like 14 or 15 of these. A buddy of mine was like, you ever consider doing a podcast? I was like, nope, I have not, and I don't want to. And then a couple of days later, another friend was like, this would be a really good podcast. I was like, ah. Then a third person suggested, and I was like, you're probably all right. And I listened to Beatles podcasts at that point. I'd been listening to Something About the Beatles for a long, long time. The Beatles Books podcast, I'm the Egg Pod. Like, so I've been listening to Beatles podcasts for a long time. So I kind of had like a benchmark of like, well, I've got to be at least as interesting or enjoyable as these. Like, if I were to do that, I need to like, I don't want it to just be hodgepodge and crappy. So I kind of thought about it for a few days and kind of mapped out an idea of like what I thought the show could be. And then I recorded like an intro, which I think is still on our feed. And it was just kind of like, hey, I'm Jonathan. This is me. This is what I'm doing. This is why I'm doing it. And it was really hard to like record a thing just by myself and just kind of monologue. Like, that's kind of not my natural place to be. I tend to work better with other people. Mm-hmm. And I posted it, but a friend of mine that hadn't listened to it yet was like, you should have a co-host if you're going to do this, but it needs to be somebody who's not a hardcore Beatles fan. I was like, that's a good idea. Yeah. how am I going to find somebody? We're in a pandemic and I can't leave my house really. I certainly can't have other people in close proximity. So I was sitting on the couch talking to my wife, Julia, and I said, Alex was saying I should have a host, like a guest host on this with me or co-host. I don't know who I would get. And she too had nothing to do. She goes, well, I'll do it. I said, really? Yeah, why not? It sounds fun. And so, and she had never like spoken on a microphone before. Like being an entertainer in any capacity is not her preferred occupation. She's very much an introvert. But she was into it, so we figured out like how it would work with a co-host, and I'll do this and then you can do this, and are you comfortable doing this, and kind of figured out the flow for it. And it was great because it turned into the idea of like, when I was touring a lot, the conversations that seem to pop up the most among musicians that you meet around the world or wherever, when you're just kind of killing time, are, what's your favorite Beatles song? Who's your favorite Beatle? Like, you tend to go to those same kind of the same conversation points. So I just kind of started calling musicians that I knew because no one else was working. So immediately, like, everybody was available, which was great. And then I started kind of DMing musicians that I didn't know, that I was like a fan of, but were like above my pay grade and above my circle of people that I know.
Right.
Like, for example, I reached, like, and it was all through Instagram. I'm scrolling one morning, laying in bed, and Kyle Gass from Tenacious D was playing. It might have been Blackbird, but maybe it was something I can't remember. And I was like, huh, he seems to like really know his Beatles. And I just sent a DM. I was like, hey, I do this podcast. You ever interested in talking about the Beatles? He's like, sure, let's do it. Okay, cool.
Nice.
Dave Depper, who's the guitar player in Death Cab for Cutie, posted a video where he was learning both of the guitar parts for Andrew Bird Can Sing. Like, cool. If you're spending your time doing that, you got to be a nerd too.
Right.
DM'd him. And he was like, I would love to. Let's do it. Sean Nelson, who's the singer for Harvey Danger, he shared something that he wrote after the Harvey Danger years. He was a writer and editor for a paper in Seattle, and he shared a obituary he wrote for George Harrison when George died, and he shared it on like the anniversary in 2020, and it was like an amazing read. He posted every year, and so I just sent a DM. And he was like, I'd love to do it. I'll do 3 shows a day anytime you'll have me. Because he is like dyed in the wool hardcore nerd. Consequently, he's been on the show like 6 times now.
Yeah.
Like, he's a great guest to have. He's super fun. But so through that and just through the show, it's kind of taken us to all these different places of meeting all these people, people that we've met in real life, people we've only ever met on the podcast, like genuine friendships that we've made, which is really amazing. And now we've kind of found ourselves in this amazing little circle of Beatle fans who, are communicative and talk and, put stuff out there, or who don't put stuff out there. Like, it's the fandom is such an amazing place to find, like-minded people. And, on the whole, all such welcoming, nice people. So it became like the real, kind of bright light, like bright spot out of everything that happened during the pandemic. And now we're, coming up on, it'll be 5 years this July, I think.
Wow.
And we're currently, I think, 130 something episodes in, somewhere up in that ballpark, I think.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's that's a beautiful story, Jonathan. And what I appreciate and kind of what I'm hearing is this notion of belonging, which
Mm.
I think is what attracts so many people to the Beatles.
Mm-hmm.
You can there's a level of identification, there's a level of inclusion that even though the band's not been around for as a unit for 50 some over 50 some years, and they haven't necessarily 2 of the members are still with us, but there's just something about like that just kind of brings you in. and that you find connection and you find
Hmm.
belonging, which goes through a larger theme in their work. I've talked about, I know you've talked about, like, she loves you. That was intentional. Uh,
Hmm.
those pronouns, in terms of connecting with fans,
Yeah.
and I think very much they hug this fine line between doing something like Carnival of Light or Revolution Number Nine or You Know My Name, Look Up the Number, things that were very much pieces of music for them, right?
Hmm.
But in the same regard, there's still this level of songwriting and inclusion, and people can kind of land on, and
Yeah.
and you see that through all of their work. Mr. Moonlight, I mean, that was, yeah, yes,
They loved it.
they loved it. It was a cheesy
Like,
song,
yeah.
but yeah, but hey,
I,
we're just doing it, yeah,
yeah. I think there's an element of, they're both writing to, they were singing and writing songs to fans, but they're also very much letting fans into kind of their
yeah,
deep, deep inner workings. And they were not the first band or artist to write their own songs, but they were kind of the ones that established the self-contained writing band.
yes,
Like, no one knew what Elvis was really thinking because Elvis didn't write those songs.
yeah.
Like, he put out the emotion for it, but you never knew what Elvis was thinking. You really know what these four guys are thinking and what they're feeling and going through. Um,
Mhm.
and there's a real level, I think, of deep empathy that you
Yeah.
have to have and be willing to put out there and expose as a songwriter of that level. And I think there are people who share that level of empathy and that level of willingness to put that same feeling back out into the world and that same willingness to love. And those are the people who really grasp to the Beatles. Those are the ones who become the hardcore fans. I mean, I think and I'll jump over to the Beach Boys for a second.
Nice.
Um, I think for people who, everybody loves the surfing USA, car songs. Those are great. They're fine. They're
Mhm.
awesome. But then when you hit like Pet Sounds, there's a real disconnect. Like, a lot of people, it doesn't do it. It's too sympathetic, too whiny, it's too blah, 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 it's too emotional.
Mhm.
Well, there are also people who think that is like the deepest emotional form of like opening your heart to the world.
Yeah.
And I think that people that toe that line uh, are the ones that become deeper connected fans to things and kind of become those hardcore lifelong fans. And that's where I think I found myself, and that's kind of the people that I think I found myself surrounded with. Like, when we went to the Fest for Beatles fans last year for the first time.
Well,
I'd
nice.
always wanted to go. I never knew what it was like. I had no idea going into it what it was going to be like. It was like a family reunion, and I've never been to a family reunion. So, like, I thought this was amazing. Like, there were all these people that I'd met through the podcast, people I'd never met before.
Mhm.
Everybody was so friendly and so warm and welcoming. I felt like I'd found a family reunion that, like, oh, I didn't know everybody was doing this today. Like, it was amazing. Um, so it does give you this weird sense of belonging, even, and it's weird because the Beatles are like the biggest band in the world of all time. Like,
Mhm.
there are few bands or brands as big as the Beatles. It's like saying I like McDonald's. Like, it's so omnipresent. It's
Yeah.
the Beatles. Um, but within that gigantic world is this really amazing tight core
Mhm.
of like hardcore fans who, when you meet those people on the street, like, they're your people.
Yeah.
They're going to be your people forever. It's an incredible world to have, found ourselves in.
It also kind of echoes, and you were so generous in the kind of the pre-questionnaire that I have guests do. I mean, which I'm grateful for, and I'm like, man, this has the makings of just that kind of deep feeling memoir, which I see coming. I just felt it coming, but you concluded it with the Beatles are really the alpha and omega for me. And I value that sentence on a lot of different levels. And I'd just love for you to expand on that here.
Yeah. Um, so much of where I've found myself in life, I owe to the Beatles. I discovered the Beatles at a really young age. I was like 9 or 10,
Yeah.
um, and it was like I was in a an orthodontist waiting room, waiting for my sister to get her braces tightened or something, and I should have known better. Came
Hmm.
on the Muzak system, and I immediately was just like, "What is that?" And I asked my mom. I said, "What is this?" Well, that's the Beatles. Who are the Beatles? Like I had to know everything. It was, and I kind of like they were not my first like hardcore
Hmm.
love thing. Like as a kid, this is gonna sound weird. I was like a hardcore BB King fan at like 6 years old. It's very strange.
Nice.
Um, but like my parents had a bunch of BB King records, and it just something clicked, and it just was it for me. I felt the same way about the Blues Brothers. Like they had a HBO taped copy of the Blues Brothers I watched all the time. I knew that soundtrack like the back of my hand by the time I was like 5. But the Beatles, when I heard that, I had to know everything. And so we went home. I remember my mom had Abbey Road, and I was
Nice.
like, "Well, this does not sound like the same band I just heard. That's confusing." And so then my aunt had a copy of Beatles Six, the Capitol record. So she let me borrow that, and I remember looking at the two covers of Beatles Six and Abbey Road and going, "How are these the same four guys?
Yeah.
This doesn't this doesn't sound like the same four guys." Um, and so from there, I kind of just had to know everything. And then I found, I would go to the local video store, and they had a Hard Day's Night on VHS. And um,
Hmm.
what's the Ready Steady Go video? Like I forget what that one was called back
Yeah.
then.
Man, I remember that was on VHS. I can see
Yeah.
it now because it's where they do shout and they all take a
Yep.
lead.
Mm-hmm.
It's and is it around the Beatles? It's
Yeah, it's the Around the Beatles special. Yeah.
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 Yeah, maybe it
And
was
so
called
I
Steady Go or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was something like that. And so I just started anything I could find, and it was hard to find it because it's not like now where everything's on YouTube or everything's available. Like I had to really track things down. And I remember one year finding out that my math teacher was like a huge Beatles fan, and so she started bringing me her records and her VHS tapes and letting me take them home and borrow them and like make copies of things. And
Nice.
so you know then from that, once I got to like fourth grade, I could join the school band. It's like, oh well, God, I want to join the band because I want to play music like the Beatles, and I became a drummer. And so, and you sit there learning, learning rudiments on just a single snare drum. I'm like, I want to play the drum set, and the drum kit hung out in this closet in the band room. And during lunch, I could go in there and play on the drum kit. So I taught myself drum kit by learning slow Beatles songs. So I was like, well, I can learn Hey Jude because that's simple and slow. So I
Yeah.
learned how to play the fill and just kind of do the simple drum patterns. And then I kind of learned the quicker stuff. And then when I got into like, I don't know, eighth or ninth grade, by that point, I wanted to join a band because I wanted to be in a band like the Beatles.
Mm.
And then that led to another band. And then I started playing guitar when I was, I don't know, 14 or 15, um, learning to play along to Beatles songs. And then from there, when I got through college, I met, a musician here locally. There's a band called Cowboy Mouth. They had
Yeah,
some hits in the 90s,
they did.
and I got to know their drummer, who's the singer, and also a huge Beatles nerd. So we became friends over that. And we used to just hang out and listen to Beatles records and just compare bootlegs that we had. And then he produced a record for a band I had at the time, but then one of his band members quit, and I got asked if I wanted to audition. And so then all of a sudden I joined this band, and at 25 was on the road touring 225 days a year, um, in a bus, kind of like doing the thing that I wanted to do all of a sudden because this Beatles line had pulled me the whole way through. Um, you know, it's and now here I am, years later at 43. and I've got, I didn't meet my wife because of the Beatles, but she's definitely, I think, kind of her fandom of the Beatles has grown as we've been together. Um, and now we have this great thing that we get to like bond over and do, and that's like our little fun thing. There are times where like she can't do an episode with me, and I feel like a lost ball in the high weeds because it's like that's our thing, like I love doing our thing together. And now I've got a band that plays Beatles music, which is amazing, and it's successful, and it does really well around here. Um, and so, I've met so many friends through it, and so many opportunities that presented itself through the Beatles that so much of and then even just on like a social and a social political level, like the way I feel about things, I owe to the things that they've put out there.
Yeah.
Uh, so the Beatles have really shaped so much of who I am. I can't fathom what things would be like if I had said, if it was like, oh man, maybe I'm more of a Stones guy. Like, I don't know who I would be. I don't know. Um, so much of what I do is owed to the Beatles, in every facet of my life. Um, I, I really, having something that I enjoy as much as I enjoy the Beatles makes me feel really fortunate because I don't know if everybody has the thing that they love that much that they get that much joy out of. Like, like I mentioned, and you and I talked earlier about how my dad passed away a few months ago. My dad didn't love anything that much. He just kind of like worked every day and did the thing and like didn't have any passions. Like I remember having a conversation one day with him, like, if you weren't doing this, like, what was your dream job? Oh, I didn't have one. Nothing, like nothing you ever really wanted to do. Nah, you just wanted to work. Yeah, that's about it. Like, what were your passions? Like art, music, film? Nah, like he didn't have that. And that's so foreign to me
Yeah.
because like I have this thing that brings me so much joy. It's weird to other people, I guess, because you get so much joy out of one thing. Um, but yeah, they're just everything to me. Like they really, really are. I hope that answers the question. I feel like I rambled forever.
No, no, it does. I mean, truly the alpha and the omega, and definitely condolences for you on the loss of your father. I
Oh,
know
thank you.
that's not easy. As you were saying that, Jonathan, I was thinking about like how, I was about 9 or 10 when I first discovered the Beatles as well, and I would try to read and devour, as much as I could about them. In fact, I still have one of the Scholastic, remember them, Scholastic
Mm-hmm.
books on the Beatles that I used to read cover to
Nice.
cover and memorize. And you'd read in these books about how Paul was influenced by Dylan Thomas's poem Fern Hill when he wrote Penny Lane. And so I would go track down at my library Fern
Mm-hmm.
Hill, or he heard the Bach's Brandenburg Concerto. So I would go track that down. And well, what is this weird instrument called the sitar?
Yeah.
Shankar. And so that led me down that path. And it's kind of like all of these 6 degrees of separation, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe 6 degrees of passion or 6 degrees of origins. And I would go back and find a connection and then discover, oh wow, the guy that played the lead guitar on While My Guitar Gently Weeps, that's Eric Clapton. Oh,
Yeah.
man, he was in this band called the Yardbirds. Oh, yeah. Then he was in this band called Cream, and then Blind Faith, and Derek and the Dominoes. And wait a minute, Derek and the Dominoes, he wrote that because he was in love with Patty Harrison, George's wife. So it just this kind of fun safari, if you will,
Yeah.
of learning and exploration and connection, and it just kind of I'm with you. If I hadn't had that kind of exposure to the Beatles and wanting to learn, well, man, who is Mother Mary and Let It Be and all of
Mm-hmm.
the things. It was an entry point to a lot of joy in my life, an entry point to a lot of learning in my life, an entry point to connection. Had there been no Beatles, you and I would not have ever had this conversation. And
Right.
we, we've been kind of swimming in these alternate marrows in different parts of the world. And again, boy, who gets the inside joke on the Monkees?
Yeah.
Not many people do. And actually, that should probably, after you're done ranking the Beatles, you should rank the Monkees.
Two things real quick. One, that topic has come up multiple times. It's definitely in my head. I don't know that I would do it song wise. I might do albums and just do
Yeah.
like a self-contained, like a short podcast series. But one of the things when I first met my wife early on, this was like an early date. We were doing something, I don't remember, but she quoted Head. She quoted oh god,
Nice.
what's his face? Who's the boxer that's in Head?
Oh, Sonny Liston. Yeah.
Sonny Liston. She turns to me and she goes, "How's about some more steam?" I just went, "Did you just quote Head?" And she said, "Yes." And I was like, "Oh, I'm done." Like
Yeah, this is it. Yeah.
we're 100% growing old together, you and I. Um, that was one of multiple early signs where I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm in. I'm in for the long haul with this one."
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, and it's not even that she was like a huge Monkees fan, but she'd seen Head like multiple times as a teenager, and like that was just something that was in her head. Um, so yeah, but yeah, it's weird how these worlds present people to you that like make such interesting connections, and such impressions in life. Um, you know, the number of people that I've met who I've been fortunate enough to either work with or make music with or just share a great conversation over a beer or whatever, like the happiness that it's brought into my life is immeasurable. It really is. Like every time I look around and think, I have so much Beatles junk like in my house, like we're always like, Julia's always like, do you really need the Beatles Crocs, like whatever, like the next thing is, which
Yes.
I don't know. Have you seen the Crocs?
I have the yellow submarine Crocs. A friend of mine sent those to me. Yeah.
They've got these new ones coming out that like they're really amazing. I've never bought Crocs. I've like fought against the Crocs for years, but I'm buying these Crocs.
Same here, man.
But she's like, do you need more Beatles stuff? And I don't, but it's just they're they're pieces of things that just remind me of the happiness that it brings to me. It's not like I have no real need for this yellow submarine figurine thing that's right here,
Nice.
but it makes me happy because it's
It's the
I,
Beatles.
I think of all my Beatle friends and all the fun that I've gotten to have through life because of it.
Yeah. There. No, I concur. And had I met your wife before I met my wife, and she quoted, the 1968 cult classic film Head, I probably would have dropped to a knee and proposed as,
Right.
as well. So that's, I'm glad you found her. But if I
Yeah.
had, any alternate universe, I would have done the same thing. Like, will you marry me?
Right.
You
If
know.
somebody compared the Beatles kind of universe to the Marvel universe, which is such an interesting comparison because
Yeah,
I'm not a big comic person. I've not seen all the Marvel films. I watched a bunch during COVID because I was like, I should probably catch up on some of this.
sure.
It's pop culture. I should probably know some of this. Um, but I understood what that meant, what it meant for the Marvel, like what
Mm,
Marvel's universe was. Like when they said that, I understood the breadth of it because the Beatles universe is so massive and so intertwined, and all these timelines and stories are so connected, and not just within the four Beatles, but from all the bands that we've talked about today, from the Monkees to the Beach Boys to Clapton and all these people. And now, 60 years later, to you and me and my wife and all these other podcasters and people that we've gotten to know, it's all this big kind of, connected universe, which is so interesting because I don't know of many bands that are the center of something like that.
yeah, and if you think about that standpoint, mean, in many ways, that's how the Beatles formed. That's how John and Paul found each other. When Paul went to the Fate and heard the Quarrymen and John Lennon singing, and he said John, John was throwing in blues songs, because and I remember the quote is, I knew what he was doing, and
Mhm.
and then when they both found out that they not only listened to the same music but wrote songs and appreciated Little Richard and Chuck Berry and all of those things, and then you see that I think very beautifully this kind of connected universe that the Beatles were in, very similar to what you're saying as from the kind of the larger Beatle universe that you and I float around in. But you see that specifically in the Get Back documentary, all these inside jokes, them
Mhm.
finishing their sentences, them riffing and busking on an obscure Chuck Berry song, and Paul going, "Oh yeah, I know what and they or the
Mhm.
Everly Brothers, and they just have this kind of shorthand lingo, Morse code between the four of them that's filled with all these references and connections and things that they love and things that they're into. And I think that's very similar to this kind of larger universe, this fandom in the Beatles world that you've painted very beautifully.
Yeah, and I think it gives you kind of a goal of like, you see those connections that they have, and you go, I want a friend like that.
Yes.
Like I want somebody in my life that I have that connection with. Whether it's romantic or platonic or whatever, you know, it's like aspirational. I think there's so much to learn
Yeah, man.
from their story in so many different ways. Like personally, like you want that connection, but there's also the cautionary tale of like, you need to learn to communicate with people. Like that's their biggest problem, is as well as they could communicate, they also could not communicate.
Yes.
And there was a point where that became the downfall. Like watching Get Back, I remember just being like, my God, if therapy was normalized in 1969, this would not have been a problem. If
Yeah.
work-life balance was a thing, you would realize we don't need to make a record right now, guys. We can all go take a break. Like, let's all maybe talk about why we don't want to be here, and then let's put a pin in this.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much to learn from that, and even musically, there's so much to learn. Like, obviously, every musician is influenced by the Beatles, and if they say they're not, they're lying. But uh, every music, I think, the things you can. I mean, not just the quality of craftsmanship, but lessons in like learning restraint.
Mm.
Like they could have easily thrown 3-part harmonies on everything, and Paul could have gone. Every bass part could have been insanely busy. Ringo could have done rain in every song, but they all understood like you don't need to do that. Like
Yeah,
we're
man.
all serving the common goal here. We don't need to all be the star of the song. The song is the star. So what best serves that? Like I love going back and listening to outtakes of things or alternate mixes and hearing all the things that they tried and then said, no, we don't need it.
Yeah.
Like it's so refreshing, because I think now, especially as a songwriter, every song has all these bells and whistles and so many things,
Hmm.
and you just don't need it if the song is good. And like that's always, I think, a good learning point. Like it's weird as a guitar player right now. There's all these like guitar players on Instagram and stuff who are really incredible players. And they're doing all these fancy things, and it's like, okay, well, that's cool, but like, what's your song? Like, can you make me feel something with less notes? Because that's the impressive thing. Like, I can be blown away by 1,000 fireworks, but if there's one big firework, ooh, that's cool. Make me feel something with less, and I think they got really good at that. Uh, so as a musician, there's countless lessons to learn from them, and I think just as people, there's so many lessons to learn from them, and
Yeah.
that's why I think their story
True, man.
is so it's always prescient. It's always current. It feels like, because
Mm.
it's a very human story, and we learn more and more about it all the time. which you'd think we've uncovered every possible thing that there is to about the Beatles, but there's so much left to learn. And it all is just kind of adding to this understanding of the story, and I think understanding of ourselves. Like the more we learn about what happened to them, I think the more we learn about our own lives and where our stories have gone and where we've misstepped in relationships and what we could have done better, how we can be better in the future. So it's really just this constantly refreshing source, I think, of life that's really, really intriguing, because not many things exist like that anywhere.
Yeah. It's why things like Shakespeare,
Mm.
Beethoven, Homer, all of those things still last and endure because the Beatles story is very much a human story. And
Mm-hmm.
and I love your take on Get Back, because as much as they have this kind of secret communication and all these inside jokes, there are larger elephants in the room that they're not talking about at
Yeah.
all. And so there's a lot of lessons in humanity for us to take from and vibe off of. For those that want to connect with you or follow Ranking the Beatles or follow around the Walrus, what are the best ways to kind of connect and tune in with your universe?
Yeah. Everything Ranking the Beatles related, you can find anywhere you get podcasts. We are at rankingthebeatles.com is our website. Episodes are all on there as well. Our socials we're on Facebook. Just search Ranking the Beatles. We're on Blue Sky, which I think is rankingthebeatles.bsky.
Yeah.
However that works. I don't know. They got to figure that out at some point. And then we're on Instagram at Ranking the Beatles as well. The Walrus, you can find us at Walrus NOLA. That's NOLA. We do a little bit of touring. We typically go kind of East Coast, Gulf South, like to Florida. Usually in the summers, we'll go to California. We may be up in the Midwest this summer if some things come through. We're going to make a record later this year that I'm very excited about. We got a grant from an organization here in town to make a record kind of our arrangements of things, not just like the straight up covers like we were talking about, but more of our individual arrangements of things. And so we're going to do that, I think, later in the fall. It probably won't be up by the end of the year just because it takes forever to make a record. But I'm really, really excited about that. That's something I've wanted to do for a long, long time. And when is this going to air?
This will probably, let's see, today is the 25th, so probably next week, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, next week.
If it's up in time on the 30th, January 30th, which is the anniversary of the rooftop show,
Right, man.
we're going to be playing on the rooftop of a building in the French Quarter that used to house Jack's Brewery, and in that building is the radio station WWOZ, and we will be playing outside of their studios on the top of the building. Did we freeze?
Yeah, we did
I think
freeze.
I froze.
Yeah, you froze
Or
there.
did you freeze?
That's a good shot of you though.
Are you frozen or am I frozen?
You're,
Ice
uh,
looks like
you're frozen. I'm not. I can see me.
okay, because you're frozen on my end. As long
Yeah.
as the audio still works, that's fine. Oh, there we go.
Yeah,
Now
there
it's
we go.
better.
There we go. We're back. There
Okay.
we go. Yeah.
All right, I'll try that again. So on the 30th, the anniversary of the rooftop show, we'll be playing on the rooftop of a building in the French Quarter. It'll be streamed live through the radio station WWOZ, which is a fantastic local radio station. Their website, wwoz.org. They stream live on there. I think it'll also be on their YouTube page for live video. And we will have some guests joining us as we recreate the rooftop show. We will not be wearing fur coats and wigs and
Max.
beards. Shouldn't be that cold here. But I'm really looking forward to that as well. That'll be a lot of fun. I
Oh,
think one of our guests is going to be Susan Cowsill of the Cowsills.
wow.
Yeah,
Great.
she lives here. She's local. She's a friend of ours, so she's always a blast to sing with. So she's going to come up. And then there's a couple other guests that'll hop up with us as well. So it'll be a lot of fun.
Oh man, I
And
wish
then
I was close and I'd be there in 2 seconds. Oh my
a
gosh,
lot,
great.
catch the stream. Catch the stream. It'll be
Will,
up.
will.
And you can follow Walrus on Facebook and Instagram at Walrus Nola, Nola.
Nice. I will.
Yeah,
I'm here to put all those in the show notes,
excellent.
and then probably I may drop this a day before the 30th, so that way
Okay.
because just because of the timing, and that day is really a special day. So
Yeah,
I will definitely stream in with you
excellent.
and cheer you on and maybe I don't know if I don't know if I'll cheer as loudly as the late great Maureen Starkey
Right.
at the end, but I'll be there kind of grooving
Excellent.
with you. That is so cool, Jonathan. I
Yeah,
am
I'm excited. I
oh,
think that's it. That's going to be at 12 Central, I believe, is
nice.
when we do that. Yeah.
Well, hopefully no police will come up and admonish you
We
to
have joked about trying to get NOPD to come up uh, and stop us, but I think they have other stuff to worry about right now. So,
Yeah, I think they do. Yeah, it's their hands are full.
yeah.
But that is amazing. And at some point, because I know you get this, and I don't even know if it's a side project or side hustle, but we need to open up the Pandora's box. That is the Wichita train whistle.
Yes.
When you talk about different arrangements, and I know that's something that with the Walrus that you all play with form and play with function there, which I love
Hmm.
very much. That album, which many consider to be a disaster or a masterpiece. You and I consider it to be a masterpiece.
Right.
Really alternate arrangements, big band arrangements of Mike Nesmith songs that were either, I think all of them for the most part, either ended up in the Monkees oeuvre or his solo canon,
Hmm.
one of the two. So we'll have to open up that Pandora's box, man.
I would love to. I
That
would love to do that.
that story needs to be told. That's either a documentary
Yeah.
or a fictionalized film that really needs to be made. In
Before like all the players are gone, someone needs to get their stories for sure.
Yes, absolutely. There's a few things in the Wrecking Crew
Hmm.
documentary which came out several years ago, and I know Hal Blaine, the great Wrecking Crew drummer, has written. In fact, he wrote a little bit about those sessions. But yes, you're right. There's a story that needs to be told there,
Yeah.
which I think would be pretty cool to explore and celebrate Nesmith and just that great album, which is
Yeah.
just so beautifully over the top. I love it.
Yeah.
Love
I'm
it.
gonna put that on today. I've got to take down our Christmas decorations. I'm gonna put that on while I do it.
Yeah, I'm gonna put that on after I press stop here. I realize that's an album I need to sitting over there. I need to put on. So
Nice.
we'll play it in solidarity.
Yes.
I am so grateful for you, and I'm grateful for our conversation, and I'm grateful for our brotherhood in the Beatles universe.
Likewise. Thank you, man. This has been a blast.
It really has been. Friends, this is why the Beatles matter, and definitely Jonathan Pretus has in more ways than one really made the case for not only ranking the Beatles, but why the Beatles matter and still endure. And I'm very grateful for his time, his conversation, his expertise. Please be sure to follow him. I will include all of the links in the show notes. Ranking the Beatles is definitely is a podcast that you will find yourself either amening or arguing with, and like how dare they talk about that song in this way, and then to conclude real quickly, you mentioned the Blues Brothers, man. We need to
Mhm.
make another case for Murph and the Magic Tones to cover, or some reunion version of the Murph and the Magic Tones to cover Mr. Moonlight.
Mr. Moonlight. There's some kind of medley of Quando, Quando,
Quando, Quando.
Quando, and Mr. Moonlight with that organ he's got
Yeah.
covered in, was it like covered in
like
like burgundy
velour or
fur or
something.
something. It's so good. I love that.
Yeah, so we'll there's definitely got to be a mashup mashup there. So anyway, on this note, if anybody is still listening, if you have you've done a great job keeping up with all of our rabbit holes. This is Sean Gay
Yes.
with Jonathan Pretus. This is Why the Beatles Matter. Thanks so much for tuning in. Stay fab.